It's the franchise where dream sequences aren't just accepted, they're encouraged. So since it's the Halloween month of October, it's time to talk about all 9 of them. Hi, my name's Zach, and today we are discussing and ranking all 9 A Nightmare on Elm Street movies. Before we get started, I started this YouTube channel because I cannot watch a movie without needing to talk about it afterwards. So if that sounds like you're in the right place, consider hitting that subscribe button. And also, comment down below your thoughts, opinions, and rankings of the Nightmare on Elm Street films. I'd love to see how your list looks. Also, if you've got a recommendation, a suggestion of a video you want to see from me, you can also drop that down in the comments below, and I might just do it. With all that out of the way, let's get started with my list at number 9. Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, and final for a little while it was. This is a self-admitted Looney Tunes recreation in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, where right off the bat you've got Freddy Krueger doing a parody of The Wizard of Oz at the start of this film.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little soul too.
From there, we just get a bunch of Wile E. Coyote type scenarios with Freddy and some of the teenagers where they just went full goofy and silly with the Freddy character here. Robert Englund also has lost all of the terrifying and imposing presence of Freddy on screen, where you get sequences in here where Freddy is tiptoeing behind characters, basically breaking the fourth wall, scraping his knife glove all over a chalkboard to have a character's head explode, putting characters into a video game so he can do a Nintendo commercial for the film.
Now I'm playing with power.
It's not that this is without creativity. There are a couple kills in this that I think are pretty funny and I have fun with, but it's lost a lot of the reverence that came with A Nightmare on Elm Street in the previous films. It completely goes off the rails and becomes a spoof of what it previously was. They also shot the film in 3D, so there are some horrendous effects that come at the screen because you're supposed to be wearing 3D glasses, but of course nowadays we don't have those 3D glasses anymore, so it completely dates this film as well. For a final entry in the Robert Englund continuity of Freddy films up until that point, this is a massive disappointment and a terrible way for this character to have gone out. Up next, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2010, and in some ways I can appreciate what they were trying to do with this remake reboot of the franchise. They wanted to make it more grounded, they wanted to make it more gritty. Freddy, they wanted to make him more terrifying and imposing, kind of harking back to the first Nightmare on Elm Street. So you get moments in here where Freddy doesn't crack a whole lot of jokes. He does come across as just this really scary monstrosity beast. You get characters who haven't slept for days, so they've got makeup on that makes their eyes look really baggy and saggy, and they really tried to bring this down to a more real world scenario. The only problem with that is that you lose all of the fun and wacky silliness that also comes along with the franchise that inherently makes it what it is, and thus this feels like a pale imitation, or poor imitation I should say, as to what the original film and original film in the early franchise were. Also, the dream sequences in this film, I feel, are lacking creativity. A lot of the dream elements just take place in the boiler room setting of Freddy Krueger. They don't do a lot with the surrealism and the distorted reality that the previous films do, that give it that unique, interesting aesthetic that the franchise is so known for. A lot of that is absent and missing from this film. There's also way too many moments of callbacks and references to the previous films that come across as just blatant ripoffs once you do them so many times in here. Also, I gotta be honest, I'm really not that big a fan of this Freddy Krueger. They go so deep into his evils and what he did to children that kind of blurry line where you're able to have fun along with Freddy, also acknowledging that what Freddy's doing is terrible and he's the bad guy. Here, that blurry line isn't so blurry anymore. It's hard to have fun with this Freddy Krueger when they go so in depth into what he actually did before he became this night stalking killer. So there's a lot of things in here I thought were interesting swings that they tried to do with the franchise to bring it into the 2010 era. Unfortunately for me, a lot of it really did not work. A Nightmare on Elm Street, The Dream Child. And this is kind of where you can feel the franchise is running a little bit out of gas. There's definitely some moments in this film that give me what I look for in this franchise that I have fun with. The motorcycle death of Dan, for example, is one of the more memorable moments in this movie, but I find a lot of this movie to be kind of dull and uninspired for a Nightmare on Elm Street film. Again, the Dan kill with the motorcycle is a big standout. There's also the comic book guy who goes into his comic book dream with Super Freddy and gets shredded up into paper. That's kind of a fun concept. I don't think it's as cool as it probably looked to be written on the page. But the thing that I think keeps this movie down near the bottom of the list is I feel like it doesn't fully utilize the concept of this film, where Alice is now pregnant with a baby who apparently the unborn baby is having dreams that Freddy is latching onto, and that's how he's able to come back in this film. I think that's a pretty out there smart concept that I wish the film explored and played more around with. This film is just concerned with following that formula that they know works for these movies, getting these dumb teenagers and having them killed off by Freddy one by one, which there are entertainment moments in this film with that, but for the majority of the movie, I find that it's kind of paint by numbers, not that interesting, and even the kill sequences, which are usually the most fun and creative parts of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise, they're kind of dull here. Just outside our top 5, A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 2, Freddy's Revenge. And coming off of the huge success of the first film, with Wes Craven not really involved in this project, it's pretty evident that the people behind this one, they're not really quite sure where to take the franchise, what Freddy Krueger is or is going to be moving forward, and thus you get the biggest black sheep of the entire franchise here, where they kind of abandon the whole Freddy invading dream aspect of the first film that really was the core of what made that film so terrifying, and they transition into a more standard possession film where Freddy needs to take over the body of this teenage boy in order to break out into the real world. It feels completely detached from the rest of the franchise because so much of the lore and mythology of the franchise is absent in this film. And on top of that, you don't really get some of the visuals and abstract nature that you're so used to getting in this franchise. Granted, there are still some fantastic visual and practical effects going on here, and some pretty great kills, one of them being when Freddy breaks out of the teenager's body. That still holds up pretty well to this day. I still enjoy Robert Englund in the role of Freddy Krueger. In fact, he's pretty menacing and terrifying here. I just don't think this film entirely works as a Nightmare on Elm Street movie, and I don't think it works within the franchise as a whole. Kicking off our top 5, A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. And this is where the franchise, you can kind of feel they're floundering a little bit. They have a formula that they know works for these films, but they're not quite entirely sure what to do with it. They've killed off Nancy in the last film. They start off this film killing off the rest of the Dream Warriors with Kincaid and Kristen and Joey, which not the biggest fan of seeing all those characters that survived at the end of Nightmare 3 die right off the bat in this film, so that we can introduce a whole set of new characters, with Alice taking over the role of Kristen, kind of getting her dream sharing powers transferred over to her. And I find Alice to be kind of a bland and uninteresting protagonist for these films. But when it comes to the Nightmare on Elm Street films, what you're really looking for is some fun Freddy kills and some creative, unique dream sequences. And I do feel like Dream Master utilizes those aspects of the franchise arguably the best. There are some really out there, out of the box creative thinking when it comes to these kills, whether it be the girl who works out and is afraid of bugs, and literally that's kind of all you learn about her. Well, Freddy breaks her arms and then turns her into this cockroach that emerges out of her body and eventually gets trapped in a cockroach trap, which Freddy then squishes. That is so crazy and so insanely out of the box. I really do love that kill in this movie.
You can check in, but you can't check out.
There are moments like that in this film that make it a standout for me in the franchise. There's also a lot of stuff story-wise that just leaves me a little bit frustrated, whether it be that Freddy Krueger seemed to get definitively defeated at the end of Nightmare 3, but because we need to make more money, we need to bring Freddy back for this entry, we're just gonna have Kincaid's dog pee on his grave in a dream with fire, and Freddy is revived, reborn, whatever. Freddy Krueger's back. You don't think about it because you don't come to these movies to have a thoughtful, provoking story. You come for stupid teenagers getting killed by Freddy in creative ways. And to be fair, this entry does deliver that in spades for me. Freddy vs. Jason. Aside from both Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street being slasher horror films, there's really not much that these two have in common, so the idea of bringing them together in a team-up film seems pretty ridiculous, but the writers behind this movie were very smart with how they approached this story, where it is essentially a Nightmare on Elm Street film with guest star Jason joining the mix, where Freddy Krueger, he's lost all of his powers because people have forgotten about him, so he uses Jason through his dreams to bring him to Elm Street, to strike fear back into the community and eventually bring his presence back into Elm Street. The only problem is Jason himself is also a slasher killer, so he's taking all the fun away from Freddy. So when you get these two on screen together and they're fighting and they're duking it out, it's a ton of fun, and they utilize both of these slasher icon skills and abilities to their full potential. They give you almost everything that you would hope to see from these two icons when you bring them on screen together. There's also a couple really fun dream sequences that really harken back to the peak days of the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. There's a couple of tropes and cliches in here, like the annoying teenage characters you don't really care all that much about. Also, this is at the era where they were really incorporating a lot of early CGI, special effects, computer animation graphics into horror films. So there's a lot of moments in this film that don't hold up very well and do take away from the scary factor of this film. But the Nightmare on Elm Street films have never been that terrifying to me, at least not when I was old enough to start watching them. So the fact that this plays a little bit goofier, a little bit sillier, feels like it's in line and is consistent with the franchise itself. Plus, you've got Jason and Freddy meeting up and fighting for the first time, and I think they did a really great job of bringing that across onto the screen. That Freddy vs. Jason, while it's not a perfect film, while I may have hoped for a little bit more out of it, I still have a really fun time with it. Kicking off our top three, Wes Craven's New Nightmare, and this is a completely outside the box, completely different type of film within this franchise that I honestly can't help but admire and love it for it. It definitely feels like a precursor to the Scream era that's about to begin with Wes Craven. In fact, if you watch A New Nightmare and Scream back to back, not only is it a fun double feature, but it also becomes even more evident that that is the course that Wes Craven was taken. I just think the idea of bringing Heather Langenkamp back and Robert Englund back and having them play themselves outside of the movies, changing up the whole mythology and lore of Freddy Krueger, making it a actual entity in the real world that Wes Craven trapped by writing the script of the movies, and as long as they keep making Nightmare on Elm Street movies, this character gets trapped in the films. But now that they've stopped making them, now this character is out roaming free and is actually terrorizing the real Heather Langenkamp from the original Nightmare on Elm Street film. That's such a bonkers and wild idea, but it's a lot of fun to explore and play around with within this film. It's so much fun to see the original cast come back as themselves in this film. Robert Englund, even though he's not within the movies, he gets to play Freddy Krueger once again, terrifying and imposing. In fact, this Freddy Krueger, even though he's got a changed up design and a changed up lore and he's not the same Freddy Krueger, he's one of the most terrifying Freddy Kruegers that I find to be on the screen. And there's definitely moments in this film where if you try to think about it too hard, the logic of everything just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. I don't think particularly the young boy in this film who is supposed to be the vessel in which Freddy is coming out into the real world works all that well for me, but the idea is just so creative, so innovative, so out there and unique that, yeah, I think it deserves to be higher up on this list. And I really enjoy seeing what the heck Wes Craven was trying to do here. Our runner-up at number 2, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 Dream Warriors. And this is arguably the best and the peak of the entire franchise. I don't have it at the top, as you can see in this list, but it is one of the most creative and inventive entries in the franchise, where you bring back Heather Langenkamp as Nancy. Now she's trying to be a mentor for these other Elm Street kids that are being tormented by Freddy. They add a new layer on top of the entire franchise, where one of the characters, Kristen, is able to pull people into her dreams, and thus you kind of get this sense of this band against Freddy in this film, which is very different than a lot of the other entries in this franchise. On top of that, Freddy Krueger here, he has got some one-liners that he's throwing out there. He's being a little bit of the comedic side of Freddy Krueger, but he still comes across as intimidating, as imposing. There are some of the most creative and memorable deaths in this film that really utilize the work of the practical effects that they're able to incorporate into this film. Whether it be the girl who gets her head smashed into the television set, or the puppet-obsessed character who later becomes a puppet himself at Freddy's command. There are so many sequences like that that just stick in your mind when it comes to this film. I love seeing Nancy come back into the picture here. It's a nice welcomed and familiar presence into the film. A couple things that kind of shorthand this one for me personally is I'm not a huge fan of the Amanda Krueger angle, where they try to demystify and explain the evil of Freddy. I feel like that's completely unnecessary and not needed. On top of that, I'm not a huge fan either of Nancy dying in this film, and the way that she dies, like, it's not really brought up the significant impact that it should be, that Freddy Krueger, who she defeated and got away from in the first film, was finally able to get her in this film. It feels a little bit unceremonious for me, and for a character like Nancy, who I enjoyed so much in the first film, I don't really like seeing how she goes out in this film. But with all that said, this is still one of the most entertaining and fun entries in the entire franchise that really take that idea of this man, this evil monster, stalking these teenagers in their dreams to its fullest potential. But coming in first place is going to be the original A Nightmare on Elm Street, where Wes Craven and a producer of a small little company at the time called New Line Cinema set out with nothing but ambition and a dream to make one of the most iconic horror films of all time, with one of the most iconic slashers of all time. And they really do take the concept of this monster who invades the dreams of teenagers and kills them in their dreams, also resulting in their death in real life, to its fullest extent in this film, where they've got so many moments of surreal visuals and distorted reality in the dream sequences that are able to capture the sensation of being in a dream that makes this film so relatable. On top of that, you've got the iconic performance by Robert Englund as Freddy Krueger in this film, where I argue that Freddy Krueger is probably his most terrifying that he's been in the entire franchise in this first film. Of course, you've got Heather Langenkamp in here as Nancy, the heroine of the entire first couple movies in the franchise, and you can really see just the impact that this film has in pulp culture and in the horror community in general, and it totally earns its spot there because it is so innovative. It is such a unique concept, and taking the horror and slasher formula of the time and completely flipping it on its head, doing something completely outside the box and completely creative with it that I don't really think any other horror franchise or slasher film has been able to emulate or capture that same kind of uniqueness that Nightmare on Elm Street captured. It's not perfect. Some of its visual effects and practical effects today don't entirely hold up, but there is enough in here that completely does, that totally sucks you and wraps you up in this dreamlike world that leaves it with no mystery as to why it's endured all these decades later as one of the most iconic horror films and iconic horror slashers of all time. And for that reason, it comes in as my number one favorite A Nightmare on Elm Street movie.